I said, what is it that your parents aren't getting, your teachers aren't getting, the other therapists that you had, what are they not getting that they need to see, that they need to hear? And it was that question that wasn't written down, that I wasn't reading from. And in that context, that not only opened things up for this kid, but it allowed me to really break free and understand that connection is not about reading something off of a page, and it's just about dropping down and being who you are.
Hi guys, this podcast explores the importance of our connection, well-being and mental health. To reason with someone is to motivate them to do or accept topics, ideas and issues through discussion and having conversations. This podcast is for those that want to raise their awareness, change their perspective or just have a good time. My vision is to help people find reason to live, to grow and to understand. I do that through this podcast as well as counselling individuals that want to help themselves.
No, he needs to know.
I just think he's gonna talk and it's gonna make a lot of sense.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
One man, one podcast. 3, 2, 1.
Reason With Me podcast, episode 11.
It's time!
Welcome to season 3. Now, today I've got a guest on that is the first international guest. He's also probably one of the most inspirational people that I have, that I follow quite religiously. And he's just an all-round super genuine and super authentic guy. But before I get into that, today I just want to do a massive shout out to the Young Blood Men's Mental Health Vodcast. I was on there, lucky enough to be on there and talking about suicide and how to just be able to talk about connection and how to help somebody, whether you're a counselor, whether you're not a counselor, and just being able to be that person that can start a conversation. Today I'm repping one of their shirts and it's super comfy and I super love it. So thanks so much, Young Blood. Go check them out. They got some really cool inspirational stories about people's life experience. So all right, let's get into it. Guy Macpherson has a PhD, he's a husband and a father of 2, and he holds a doctorate in clinical psychology. He has spent the last several years studying the impact and the treatment of trauma and early psychosis. In 2014, while working in a clinic in Northern California, assessing and treating young individuals with early psychosis, Guy founded the Trauma Therapist Project with the goals of raising the awareness of the trauma and creating an educational and supportive community for new trauma workers. The Trauma Therapist Project has now grown to include the Trauma Therapist podcast, now being listened to in more than 160 countries around the world, as well as Trauma Therapist 2.0, which is a membership community specifically dedicated to educating and inspiring trauma workers that are just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. Guy's focus currently is on creating a vibrant global community to support, educate, and inspire new trauma workers, as well as to upend the present way that trauma is taught at the graduate level. If you can tell in the interview that I definitely am. Having a good time talking with him. All right, Guy, welcome to the podcast.
All right, Jackson. Thanks so much, man. It's an honor to be here. It's exciting.
I'm honored that you're here. You're the first international guest and probably my man crush in terms of trauma therapy.
Nice. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So as I sort of said before in the bio introducing you, you're running the Trauma Therapist podcast, which I think is probably the leading trauma therapy podcast in the world. And I think that what I've been able to get from that has just been absolutely incredible and has really paved the way from for me as a therapist and been so valuable. And yeah, hit you up and was lucky enough to get some time with you today onto my podcast. I'm really, really stoked.
Well, thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. And that means a lot. It really does. I mean, to hear that it's inspiring you or, getting you going, that makes me excited. So it makes me feel like I'm doing something right.
Yeah. Well, you definitely are. And I'll guess what we'll do is we'll get straight into it, Guy. And I want to know, and I guess my audience wants to know, is who the hell are you and what is it that you do?
Yeah. Well, good question. So who am I? So, Guy Macpherson, I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I'm married, I have 2 kids. And what do? I have a podcast, and I think in short, what I do is I help get the word out about trauma and its prevalence and its seriousness. And I do that by interviewing therapists of all kinds, whether they've written mega books or not, but people who are passionate about helping others who've been impacted by trauma. And from that podcast, I have courses, I have a membership site to help newer therapists get going. And in a nutshell, that's what I do. And I can get into how it started because that's kind of significant too. But that's in part, in short, what I do.
Yeah, I really like the how it started. Maybe just share a little bit of that. That'd be really good, I think.
Yeah. So I had been, when I got out of graduate school, I started working in a clinic up here in Northern California, and we were assessing and treating individuals between the ages of 12 and 25 who were showing early signs of psychosis. And 99.9% of them had been impacted by trauma. And part of our job was to take these calls, referral calls, from therapists and teachers and parents to see if their kid would be appropriate to come in for an assessment and possibly be treated. And we would be taking this, and I love doing these phone calls because there was a lot of investigative work involved. And, we'd be talking to parents and they'd be telling us how their kid was blowing out at school, maybe isolating and doing drugs or whatnot. And when we started asking about trauma and used that word, oftentimes it was no. But when you started using other words like, well, is there domestic violence in the house? Yeah, there is, and well, have they gotten into any accidents? Yeah, they have. So it was very interesting. And what we would find out that not only were most of these kids or had these kids been impacted by trauma of various kinds, but oftentimes their parents didn't realize it, and they didn't realize that listening or watching or being witness to domestic violence could be traumatizing, or being bullied could be traumatizing, or any other various things. And it got to the point where I was like, what the heck is going on? Something needs to be done here. And that's in part how I started the podcast. I had never started a podcast before. I didn't know what the hell to do, and I just started, and I just started interviewing people, and what unfolded was another avenue that we could potentially go down, but that's how it started. And of course, the other thing was, and this was kind of unconscious, how much this played into it, but I had been bullied as a kid, and that just jacked up the whole trajectory of my life, of my self-esteem, my self-confidence, how I showed up in relationships and so forth, and how I got triggered when I was a therapist, so that was another thing that really that kind of inspired me to want to do something and to help.
Yeah, I think that story is so awesome because of the early psychosis, especially with younger teens.
it's all about the presenting thing. Like, this kid's in potential psychosis. That's what we need to figure out. And
Right.
the journey of just that basic investigation or exploration, you're finding out these people, majority of them have experienced some really traumatic, really difficult things that have happened in their life that sort of create the way that they present themselves, right?
Exactly. And it's very easy to, see a kid who is just being explosive in school and to think they have ADHD, or they're not paying attention, or they're, pissed off and mean and they can't do the work. But when you look under the surface, just like you're saying, oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes there's trauma to a varying degree. And of course, trauma is on a continuum. But getting to that point and understanding that is invaluable for these kids or these clients. And yes, trauma can cause these early psychosis symptoms, such as hearing voices or seeing shadows or unusual thoughts or unusual behavior, and it very much can.
So that's a really challenging and difficult line of work that you're doing, and I think you're still in something quite similar at the moment in that role with psychosis. Yeah.
Oh, am I still in that role?
Yeah, something similar.
No, I stopped that job about a year and a half ago, and I've been going with the podcast and the Trauma Therapist Project just full time. And so it's different. I mean, now I'm bringing. Sometimes I'm like, what the heck am I doing? But this kind of gets into what you were talking about before we started recording, which was, finding our true self and the importance of being that true self and all that kind of authenticity stuff. It really gets to the point of where my strengths lie or where I feel they lie,
Okay.
But yeah, so
that probably ties into my next question, Guy, is to do that work that you've been doing. That's some of that intensive work. It's very, very challenging, and it's confronting a lot of the time, and quite sad at the end of the day. Kind of, you come across some really, really devastating clients and stories. So, and now you're doing that with 4 therapists and trying to get them ready for that. So, where do you pull your strength from in order for you to do the work that you do?
Well, yeah, I mean, it can be sad, and oftentimes it is sad or was sad, but people get better.
Yeah.
And as we would say, it's not always a straight trajectory to the moon with gold stars and rainbows, and it's oftentimes up and down. But we saw people getting better consistently who came, who did the work, and that to me is exciting. And what was your question? Where do I find the strength now to do that? It's really, it's sharing in the humanity of all of us. I mean, I get excited talking to someone like you because you value and are excited by, the truth and the kind of the authenticity and making that connection. That stuff excites me. And being able to work with someone, whether, it was a client who was suffering from trauma and or early psychosis, and being able to connect with them on a human level, on a real level, and not on a level where I think I'm some, a super knowledgeable person and I have this degree and I have all this experience and all that other BS, which is kind of what I did initially, or not in a grandiose way, but just in a, when I first started out, I was like, well, I'm a therapist and I have this degree, and of course I should act this way, and of course I should know everything. But when I was able to get rid of that, and how I did that was another interesting thing, but when I was able to really be aware of that and get rid of that and just know that I was enough and I was able to make a connection with someone, that to me is exciting. And a
Yeah.
lot of that I learned on the podcast too. And that's it. That's what it's about for me. I mean, I get excited sincerely talking to someone like you who loves doing this stuff. You know, that to me is exciting.
Yeah.
So you got me going, Jackson.
Yeah, man, I'm like excited too. I'm revving up. Sometimes I want to just jump into my computer. I say that all the time. Yeah, I love that. I love that energy. It's so good. And you mentioned something. It said you pulled a lot of that from the podcast and the guests that you speak with. You speak with some of the most incredible and probably, you know, the heroes in the field for me, you know, Poat Ogden, Janina Fisher, Bruce Perry, Peter Levine. Like the list sort of just keeps going, man. And it's so cool. So no wonder you're getting like just gems flying at you left, right, and center. I think that's incredible. So one thing that you talk about a lot on the podcast, and really want to focus down today, is honoring who you are. You write about that in some of your books as well, your ebooks online, about figuring that out and figuring out. And you mentioned it a little bit there. So I guess the crux of what I want to talk about today, Guy, is I want you to reason with me and talk to me about the importance of honoring who you are, of your true self, of your authentic self. And why is that so important when it comes down to our connection, our mental health, and our well-being?
Yeah. Super question. You know, when I, as I said, when I got out of graduate school with my degree, and I think a lot of therapists feel this way, that you've gone to school, you have a degree, you come out, you got to, you know more than the average person in this, in the field, in more than the average person, period, about psychology. That's what you've been studying. Yeah. And when I got out and I got this job at that clinic, I felt that I needed to act a certain way and I needed to have all the answers. And what happens is, you know, when you're in a relationship, in a clinical relationship with someone, and you start to feel that way, or when I did, and I felt that way, I kind of felt like I was up here a little bit, not again in a braggadocious kind of way or in an obnoxious way, but in a way such that, well, I'm the therapist and I should know what's best for you. And that creates a certain dynamic that is not very helpful and certainly not the foundation oftentimes for healing. What happened was the clinical director, he was a psychiatrist, amazing dude. And he said, as he was training us initially, he said, you know, if you're going to be doing this work and you want to work with these young kids, because a lot of them were like 17 and 18, you've got to be willing to take off your clinical hat. And when I heard this, I thought this guy was on crack. What do you mean take off my clinical hat? I just spent like, you know, umpteen years studying, all this money. Why am I supposed to take off my clinical hat? And I didn't get what he meant, which was you've just got to be willing not to forget your knowledge, but to be yourself. And what happened, there was one example, and I want to, if I can share this with you. I was doing an assessment with this one young kid, and I was working with a colleague of mine, and the assessment that we had to read to this, the clients, was really 40 pages long. And there was these questions. And when I first started, I was reading them very true to, I don't know, it felt very kind of staid and rote and very uber professional. And it wasn't working. It just, this one kid was not responding. And I think I might have been like a year and a half or 2 years into my 5 years at this position. And I had the assessment in my hand, and I just put it down. I didn't like slam it. I just put it down and I laid back, and I was just like, I shifted gears kind of unconsciously. And I said, all right, I forget, let's call this kid Kyle. Kyle, I said, what is it that your parents aren't getting, your teachers aren't getting, the other therapists that you had, what are they not getting that they need to see, that they need to hear. And it was that question that wasn't written down, that I wasn't reading from, and in that context that not only opened things up for this kid, but it allowed me to really break free and understand that connection is not about reading something off of a page, and it's just about dropping down and being who you are. Because I also, in a way, admitted not only to this kid, but to myself, that I didn't know what the heck was going on. I didn't know what the answer was. And that really, but also I trusted in who I was, that I could make a connection. And that's what it's about. Being able to trust that who we are, with all my faults, with all my insecurities, with all my bullying and all the past that I've had, that I've worked through, right? With all that I can trust that I'm still enough to connect with you, and that matters.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy, because a lot of times, and I was guilty of this too, a lot of times we think that we have to have all the answers, or we have to fix and help and heal. And of course, that's not always possible. And to be okay with that, and to get to that point, requires that we do, a lot of that exploratory work on ourselves and on our story and our traumas.
Sounds like that point in time, Guy, was quite a significant one, where you sort of dropped the clinical mask or whatever that we wear when we first learn everything, and it sort of shifted that power imbalance, I guess. And that was probably a really pinnacle point in your career and in the journey so far.
Definitely. Definitely. And what happened was, when I started doing the podcast, Jackson, early on, I had a list of questions, and I really stuck to them. And one of the questions was, can you share one of your clinical errors and what you learned from it? And early on, I was interviewing a lot of seasoned therapists, because that's where I wanted to go. And more often than not, in fact, not again, 99% of the time, these clinicians would share that it wasn't so much an error in, well, I forgot what page 22 of Bessel Van Der Kolk's book said, and I was going to implement that technique, and that didn't work. It wasn't about that. It was about, they were sharing errors in kind of themselves being able to communicate or share who they were, or just be themselves. And that really struck me, because I thought it was about, well, I've got to know all this information. Isn't that what's going to make me the best trauma therapist I could be? When in fact, what I was learning and what these other therapists were saying, that's a part of it. But this other equally significant part is being able to communicate who you are and share that, because especially when you're working with someone who's been impacted by trauma, who's been ripped from security and safety and trust and self-trust. They're thirsting for that in a way, and to be able to embody that and share that, and to share your own vulnerability is oftentimes very challenging and hard, but it's vital. And that was a wake-up call for me.
That's so empowering, and I think so helpful for so many people that would be listening, that I guess are therapists and that are just not therapists, and just looking at what that means for them, and honoring the true self, and sort of owning that. So I guess what I want to hear a little bit more about, Guy, is when obviously there's Guy, and then there's therapist Guy, and defining and determining the difference is a big walk of life. So I want to know a little more about like the Guy's journey, where it's like, yes, it's going to help you become a better therapist, but what was honoring you and finding your true self and becoming so genuine? What were the steps for that like? I think you talk a little bit about the sticky bits of things. So really just want to hear like, what can everyone do, that helps and fosters that becoming?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for me, Jackson, it was a kind of circuitous journey. I mean, it was one that certainly wasn't straight and effortless and easy. It was one that was, I mean, it's challenging. When I got out of high school, I went straight to art college for a year. And then I dropped out and I played music for like 10 years. And then I wrote fiction for about 6 years. And then I decided that I was going to become a physician because I wanted to really help people on a kind of cellular level. And that didn't work out. And I switched gears and I went to get my doctorate in psychology. And I've had a lot of these kind of starts and stops and failures, if you will. And I've had to really deal with that and wrestle with that and come to terms with where my strengths are and not where other people think they are, or wanting to please other people. And it's kind of a classic cliched story almost, where you walk down these paths because you think it's going to look good to other people. And I mean, here I am now, I'm working full time with a podcast. I mean, I still struggle with defining what the heck I do, but I love communicating with people like yourself. And I love, like the questions you're answering are I think really, really inspiring to me, because we're talking about stuff, at least to me, that is to the core of what it's about when you're connecting with people. So it's, and then honoring and being willing to explore my own traumas and how the bullying has impacted me. That was in and of itself a journey that was difficult. I mean, when I first started the podcast, I wasn't really that comfortable with talking about it. And now here I am, it's fine. So I don't know. I hope that answers in part some your question.
Well, it definitely does, Guy. I mean, you come across as so genuine and authentic, and I think that's definitely where I pull a lot of inspiration from, because it's so clear when you talk. And I think obviously there's the passion that sort of sings through and the things that you're talking about, but it's not just about trauma therapy for you. It's about the passion lies in learning and cultivating that authenticity and genuineness, because at the end of the day, you take away your job, that's something you want to hold dear to yourself, is that you want to know that you can honor yourself and be with yourself.
I mean, yeah, I agree. And I've talked to people who are really accomplished in their field, in this psychology or therapy field, who will say that expression, that authenticity is what it's all about. That's where the healing happens. And I thought to myself, when I first was doing this, and I was listening to that, I was like, well, what about all the books? What about all the conferences? What about all the work stuff? Well, yes, that's important too, but it's this connection on a human level, or as one of my guests, Manuela Mishka-Reed, says, the human beingness, being able to express that. And initially I thought, well, but isn't that easy? Well, it's not.
Yeah.
Because there's so many like filters that a lot of us have. And I certainly did. I remember when I was in my graduate school training, and one of my first experiences with my supervisor, after the day of seeing clients, I went to her, and I was going to report on how the day went. And I was so frustrated. Here I was going through, I think, level 1 of sensory motor psychotherapy, and I was getting all this great information, and I, was learning stuff, and I was so frustrated. And I said to her, I said, they're not listening to me. The clients, they're not listening to me. And she said, she stopped and she was like, what makes you think that they need to listen to you? And I was like, really taken aback. And she said, it's not about what you're basically shoving down their throat. It's about that experience of, and Daniel Siegel talks a lot about this, the resonance and so forth. When you're sitting across from someone, that to me, being able to, when you're sitting with someone who is just in the moment, who is present, who is kind of emanating that contentment. And believe me, I'm not saying that I'm some Zen master at all, but when you're with that type of a person, you feed off that energy, you feel that energy, and that is very healing. And that's what I'm talking about here. That's what a lot of the people, certainly on my podcast guests, have talked about. That type of settled inness, that type of vulnerability, that type of fearlessness and creativity comes from doing that type of work on yourself, right? Where you're developed that and cultivated that type of self-awareness, where you've looked at the crap and your own traumas and worked through them. And I'm certainly not saying that they go away, but you come to a place where you've done that type of work. That's very powerful.
And it sort of stops impeding you. The things that have happened and the things that you come to the table with stop impeding your ability to be with somebody else.
Right. Because if, for example, if you're a therapist and you're working with someone who's been impacted by trauma and you haven't done your own work, you haven't looked at your own story, your own traumas, you will get triggered in session. And as one of my guests said, if you're in session with a client and you find yourself working on your own stuff, you're in the wrong room, right? In other words, you need to be in your own therapist's office.
Yeah.
That's not the place to be doing that type of work.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So it's so important to sort of start the process of letting go some of those things so that you're able to sort of step forward. And I think we do a lot of that with our clients as well. And do you think it works the same? Do you think at the end of the day it's just about being human and learning how to find that true self? Do you think it works the same?
In what sense? I'm not sure of the question.
In terms of, like a therapist trying to, become this way so they can be there for their clients. Is that the same process as it would be for just a human trying to be better in relationship? Without a doubt.
And I think it gets very tricky because for therapists, a lot of it is, needing certain information, needing to be knowledgeable in whatever specialization, whatever field they're in. Of course, that goes without saying. But oftentimes what gets lost is the importance of who you are and that self-confidence and trusting yourself and, and really getting clear on what you're doing this for. And how you want to help. Well, that's great. What does that mean to you? Well, I want to fix things, and a lot of times therapists get into this field for great reasons, right? They want to help or cure or heal. Well, that has to be brought out in the open and unpacked. Because if you're not clear on why you're in this field, you're going to be bringing in a lot of direction and a lot of bias, perhaps all well-meaning, into the room with your clients. When in reality, all clients want, and as has been kind of attested to by that famous study, which I forget what it is, but they asked a lot of people, what they remembered about their therapist, and it was that they listened to me, right? That they simple. So just being able to be and connect and to not feel the need to kind of shift the momentum of the healing process takes a lot of courage and guts and awareness, and that just breathes, I think, the healing foundation and allows that healing to come into the room.
Yeah, that's so good, Guy. I think that you've said so much valuable things so far, and it's I'm like, which part am I gonna focus on to snippet for everybody? I'm like, there's just so much. It's just so great. We'll wind down just a tiny bit, Guy. I'm going to ask you two questions. I normally ask everyone the latter, but I'll ask you this one as an additional. Is what are one of the things that you do that you think really helps you cultivate authenticity? What is it that you practice?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I do is I do the podcast. I'm constantly talking to people about this topic. So I'm constantly, it's constantly in my awareness. And not only that, but I'm constantly aware of my own actions. I mean, look, I've got two young kids, 5 and 11, and there is no better kind of reflective mirror on how you're acting and being than having a kid.
Yeah.
So, that's what I do. I'm trying on a consistent basis to be aware of my actions within this realm, within this topic. And believe me, like I said, I am no friggin' Zen master. I don't have this wired in, but it is something I do work on. And it's something I've learned and consistently am learning about and appreciate, and value.
That is exactly, I couldn't ask for a better answer. That's so good, Guy. And put you on the spot just a little bit. The other thing, Guy, is what is your non-negotiable?
Awesome.
What are the main things that you do for self-care?
I would say one of the things is just to take brief segments of time each day, and literally, whether it be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, do that. And exercise periodically throughout the week. I have to do that or I go nuts. Have, dedicated time with my wife, and those things are non-negotiable. Otherwise it just gets too much.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. I love hearing people's answers on self-care, because I think without that we're not able to do life, whether we're a therapist or whether we're just a person that's trying to get by in our day. If we're not looking after ourselves, and that's a big part about what we've been talking about is being genuine and finding the true self is getting that time for you. And I think, I really like those things. So,
oh man, that's a really good question. We're talking a trauma book or anything?
I'm talking that something that really inspires you and you get a lot out of, and I guess in the hope that might serve somebody else.
Well, I think that since we're talking about this particular topic of genuineness and authenticity, I'm going to say the book is Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke, R-A-L-K-E. So he's a German poet, French poet. I think he was German poet. But the book is Letters to a Young Poet. And it really inspires me because it's about this exact topic, which is being able to trust in who you are and finding your voice and being able to work through it, through the muck and through the mud and through the darkness, and knowing that that muck and mud and darkness exists and will be there, but working despite that and in spite of that, and moving into the lightness and that sunlight in a sense, that is something that really inspired me, because it's certainly been work. It's been and it still is, to a certain degree, challenging to be confident about my voice and what that means. So I would say that book.
Man, my add to cart is getting so big. Oh God. I think there's a difference between, I say this sometimes, there's a difference between two different hobbies: the hobby of buying books and the hobby of reading books.
Nice. Yeah.
Oh gosh. All right, Guy, thanks so much. I guess, where can people reach out to you? Where can people find you at the moment?
Yeah, I think just the Trauma Therapist Podcast, traumatherapistpodcast.com would be the best place. And that's my website. People can contact me there, get the podcast there, get information on my courses and membership there, everything.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And I'll put all of that into my website and do all the links for you. And yeah, I don't want to stop, man. I think we could talk all day, which is so good. But yeah, honestly, it's been such a real honor, and I sort of had goosebumps the whole time because I'm a huge fan of yours, Guy. And yeah, I really want to say thank you so much for being here.
Well, you're welcome. And again, it was an honor coming on. I love what you're doing, admire what you're doing, man. And it's so needed. So it was my pleasure to be on here. Thank you.
Do you want to find out more about how therapy can help you kick some goals? Go check out findreasontherapy.com.au or the Find Reason Therapy Instagram page.